Welcome back, everybody, to the Locked On Pirates podcast. I am, of course, your host who does the most, Ethan Smith, and I have to change this bottom ticker because that was the ticker from our free agency live show that we did last week when the Pirates traded for G-Man Choice. So if you haven't checked that out, please go check that out. It was a very fun show to do with a lot of interaction. You guys were awesome with that. But on today's episode of Familiar Faces Back, Gary Morgan is joining us today to talk about the Rule 5 draft. Today is a very big day for the Pittsburgh Pirates as they have to protect certain players, choose to not protect other players. But Gary's here to ask some or answer some very pressing questions about this because I will not even lie to you. I get very confused on the Rule 5 draft sometimes. So hopefully he'll make it a little bit easier for you guys to understand and everybody will be all happy and figured out by the end of it. We're going to talk about that and other things as well here on the Locked On Pirates podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at MVP_Ethan or at Locked On Pirates. And Gary will be joining us right after the intro. But let's get this thing on the road, everybody.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to that Pirates podcast, everybody. I am, of course, your host who does the most, Ethan Smith, and we're still doing 5 days a week in the middle of November right now. So we're still coming at you every single day, always talking about something every single day. And today, of all days, of course, is a big day in the offseason where players need to be protected or not protected on the Rule 5 draft, which I believe the Rule 5 draft happens next month, if I'm not mistaken. I don't even remember when it happens at this point. But Gary Morgan is joining us here today to help my incompetence on the Rule 5 draft here, because I do have an idea generally of what is going on and who they're going to protect and who's kind of on the cusp. But I brought Gary on today to kind of explain it in more terms as to why the Rule 5 draft isn't as scary as a lot of people think. But first off, Gary, it's been a while, man. I know our schedules don't usually gel too well lately, but you're back. How have things been going in terms of the life of Gary Morgan?
Busy, man. Like, honestly, I've just been running all around the country. So
Well, there you go.
It's been difficult for us to time up, but I'm glad we were able to make it happen today. Pretty good day for that. So,
oh, yeah. And to talk about the Rule 5 draft a little bit for a second, I know last year was an interesting one for the Pittsburgh Pirates because they had a lot of decisions to make last year with Caden Smith and Jigba, Travis Swaggerty, Jack Sawinski, and Leover Peguero all being protected from the Rule 5 draft. And that was like with a big group of players, like 12 guys. So I would say last year was definitely scarier than this year if you're looking in terms of the pure number of guys that you could make a feasible argument that are going to be on the Rule 5 draft. Of course, the one big name that everybody's going to know is Endy Rodriguez. Endy Rodriguez is definitely going to be a guy that you're going to see get protected today, I would pretty much assume, unless Ben Cherington just forgets to like click a certain button or something. Obviously,
I mean, mushrooms are legal in Colorado now, so if he's out there, it's possible he'll forget.
Yeah, it's very true. And I would love to see Pirates Twitter if Ben Cherington did not protect Endy Rodriguez today, because Endy Rodriguez, as Gary would explain here, hopefully in a minute after I say this, Endy Rodriguez is that kind of guy that, albeit a position player, albeit 22 years old, he's the kind of guy that would get snagged up in the Rule 5 draft very quickly by whatever team would want to take him. I mean, the guy this year, just to mention his stats again that I've mentioned before, I mean, a 354, 440, 707 with 8 home runs at Double-A Altoona, and a 302, 392, 544 with 16 home runs at High-A Greensboro. The guy is awesome. He's phenomenal. I believe he was on MLB.com's all prospect team. So Endy, obviously, I think is a guy that you're going to protect. G1 Bay was mentioned on this list, but as you mentioned to me before we recorded, G1 Bay is already on the 40-man roster. We already saw him play this year. And then Michael Burrows is probably the other one that is a for sure lock. if you want, can you go into a little bit of why pitchers, instead of like position players, are usually a little bit scarier to lose in the Rule 5 draft?
They're easier to stash. You can basically stick them in the back of your bullpen. We all saw this happen with Luis Oviedo.
Mm-hmm.
You go and grab a guy, you hide him in the back of your bullpen. You don't even have to use him. It's just a matter of how long he's on the roster. And if you're not in like win now mode, despite what Rum Bunner would try to have you believe, it's if you're not in win now mode, you can afford to waste a roster spot on holding a guy basically to steal yourself a free prospect. The idea then is that you either train them at the major league level and hey, they surprise you and do something, or you can bump them back to AAA after you've fulfilled the Rule 5 requirements using one of their options, and you've got yourself a free prospect, basically.
Yeah.
So pitchers are more often, especially relievers. Starters, not so much. But when you start getting into like, hey, when you start having conversations about the Pirates potentially manipulating someone's time, it's a pretty good guess that they're the type of guy that could be claimed in the Rule 5 draft. So Endy Rodriguez is a perfect example of that because most Pirate fans believe he's ready right in spring, right?
Yeah.
We all know he's not going to come up. We all know they're going to manipulate his time a little bit. We all know that they'll come up with some legitimate reason why he needs to be down there to train. But we also know if they left him exposed, another team would happily pick up that free MLB top 100 talent. You just can't leave it exposed.
Yeah, and also this is something I'm going to talk about. Either I'm going to double up on episodes today or talk about it tomorrow, that the Pirates cannot go into the season with the catcher position the way it looks at the moment. So I think that's another reason why people think that Endy should be up here immediately, which if the catcher position as it stands right now looks like it does in March, I would also make that argument. But again, it's not going to happen. They're going to wait until about June or July like they did with O'Neal Cruz. He'll stay in AAA for that time. He'll play phenomenal at AAA, and then he'll come up and the whole thing will be history. It's like rinse and repeat with this team. We already know it. It's no reason to get upset about it anymore. It's rinse and repeat. So Michael Burrows is one of those guys I think that is definitely in that lock position. After that, though, things get interesting. And before we get into that, of course, I want to let you guys know about the wonderful people over at betonline.ag, of course, on the bottom of the screen. If you are here on YouTube, which you should be because YouTube is awesome, and we're currently at 420 subscribers. So that's a pretty fun number. We were at 412 for a while there, and I was kind of almost asking you guys not to change that so we could have the 412 subscriber count. But of course, betonline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. There's an endless array of sports going on right now. And don't forget, a lot of people have forgotten, the World Cup starts next week. You want to bet on the World Cup and who's going to win the World Cup, do it at betonline.ag. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. They've got it all at betonline.net. They're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action happening today. And BetOnline is where the game starts. And if you would have bet on the Pittsburgh Steelers on BetOnline this past Sunday, you would have made some money because they were a +2.5 underdog against the New Orleans Saints. And Gary shakes his head. I don't blame you because I'm not touching any Steelers bet for the rest of the year based off of some of the spreads I've seen. But we're not here to talk about the Steelers. You want to do that, go check out Christopher Carter. The guy is absolutely phenomenal. His past episode on Monday, he actually got to interview Najee Harris and DeMonte Casey after the game. Go check out Chris. He's awesome. Does amazing work for everything that he does. So we talked about Mike Burrows, Endy Rodriguez. G1 Bay is already on the 40-man. So then you get into what the Athletic calls tough call territory, which is where you're looking at guys that you could make an argument, is what I would think. And they start off with Malcolm Nunez. This one is interesting because of his age, but he already is a proven power bat. He's a guy that it appears you're looking at as a future first base option. But with the addition of G-Man Choi, are you so adamant to protect him when you have a guy in G-Man Choi who you have to see possibly turns himself into a pretty good player this year?
I mean, G-Man Choi aside, because this conversation for the Rule 5 really doesn't change regardless of that. Is Malcolm Nunez really a proven power hitter? Or is he somebody who hit some home runs in a really, really small ballpark in the St. Louis system and then came over here and popped a couple? Who really doesn't play good defense
Yeah.
and runs like Moses in January. I don't know. I think the reason people assume he's going to get protected is because Ben Cherington just picked him up. But I don't think they're in any danger of him being selected. I wouldn't waste a roster spot on him. I realize I'm much more firm on this than almost everybody else on Pirates Twitter, but I just don't see much of a purpose in protecting somebody that I don't see having a snowball's chance in hell of making major leagues this year.
Yeah, and I find it very interesting that people kind of pen him as he'll be up here at some point in 2023. I don't know, because the next guy that we're going to talk about here that, Gary, I won't even lie to you, after seeing some of your tweets about him this year, after seeing some of your pieces about him this year, and after, I guess, finally hopping on the hype train, Matt Gorski is also a guy that the Pirates have to consider here. And you brought up the power element about Malcolm Nunez playing in a smaller ballpark. Well, you don't have to worry about that with Matt Gorski. He is a guy right now, I wouldn't exactly call him proven, but he definitely had a good year under the radar as well. I mean, very under the radar good year. You didn't really hear anything about Gorski until recently. He's already 24 as well.
We heard a lot about him early on, and then he got injured.
Mm-hmm.
And then the injury lingered, and it recurred, and he never really got back on the field proper until the end. Finally got a little bit of AAA time there at the end. He's a little old to emerge, but I think, again, a lot of people forget about what happened to a lot of these prospects during COVID. Especially the guys that are in that draft class from Gorski. He suffered.
Yeah.
Really got drafted, played, didn't play, played, got injured after half a season. And his only experience was really good. Very athletic kid, can play all the outfield positions, can play first base, right-handed bat, ton of power. Is it going to be a jump for him? Sure. But that's a guy that, I could see somebody stashing a lot more easily than Malcolm Nunez, because you could actually play him in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the health is a problem. That injury has recurred, and he has not come back from it. It shouldn't be as difficult as it is. It's just a quad.
Yeah.
But, Lonnie Chisenhall probably shouldn't have missed an entire season for a calf muscle. You never can tell what's going to happen with a guy. 24 is a little old for sure, but that's exactly why you kind of want to protect him, because there's a good possibility you want to get eyes on him at the major league level this year, and you might as well lock the option in.
Yeah, and you mentioned his versatility in the field as well. I mean, the outfield has a ton of options still that the Pirates still need to look at. I've mentioned this on my show the last 3 weeks about we need to go get a free agent outfielder. Do we? Because there's a lot of guys that the Pirates still need to get looks on. I think a lot of people forgot. You mentioned injuries. Kanan Smith-Njigba didn't get that much time up here before he got injured for the year. They still need to get a good look at him. They still need to get it. I mean, Jack Sawinski got sent down and brought back up again. They need to see what they have in Jack Sawinski. They still need to see what they have in Cal Mitchell, guys like that. Tuca Peter Marcano is even a guy who flirted with being in the outfield. Maybe you put G1 Bay out there.
Travis Swaggerty.
Swaggerty's a guy that, for some reason, has not been called up. Then you throw Matt Gorski into the mix. That you're talking about 9 or 10 guys in the outfield that the Pirates have to get legitimate looks at.
Yeah,
Or should.
despite his bad season last year too, Matt Frazier was just player of the year 2 years ago. So there you have a ton of people they need to go through. And they just picked up this Valade guy from Colorado.
Yeah.
Like, just because they needed to muddy the waters a little bit more. There's a lot of options in the outfield. Protecting Gorski, to be honest, that's the one thing that makes me question it. It's hard to protect another outfielder. You cannot have 7 or 8 on your 40 man. I mean, you need to have more pitchers than that.
As I mentioned last year, they protected 3: Swaggerty, Canaan Smith and Jigba, and Jack Sawinski. So you're
the first one they called up, Cal Mitchell.
Yeah, they call up Cal Mitchell of all the guys that they call up. So after Gorski, I think it gets a little more into the area of these guys probably will not be protected, but there's a possibility. You have Dario Lopez. He's a shortstop / third baseman. Had a pretty good year at Greensboro, but he's 20 years old. I don't think he gets protected just based off of that alone. Jared Triolo is an interesting one. I don't really gauge too much about him, but with Key Brian Hayes also being the third baseman, and I believe that's Triolo's primary position.
Triolo is almost as good as Brian Hayes at third base too. That's the scary thing. He is a defensive wizard. He really is. The bat has kind of trailed behind the defense, but it came on a little bit this year. Nothing exciting as far as that goes. I don't see him being selected at all, but I also don't see him as somebody that you would roll out helping your team one day.
Yeah.
So,
and then you're looking at more guys after Triolo, like Tanaj Thomas is another guy that's a little interesting because he did make the move to the bullpen. And as you mentioned earlier, you can stash these guys. And his move to the bullpen also was kind of good for him, like very good for him, I would say. Because, I mean, I believe last year in Greensboro, he had like a +5 ERA. And now this year, he was at a 3.02 as a reliever with only one start at Altoona. It's a pretty good move for him.
Yeah. I mean, the problem with Thomas really is the control. He's always struggled with it. The velocity is what makes him somebody you want to consider protecting, because he can hit triple digits. That's always going to be interesting to people. So when you like look at something like that, that's a consideration. He's somebody I would consider protecting, if only because you need those optionable players to go back and forth.
Yeah, and that's a very good point here. And then you bring up Cam Aldred, who I wouldn't even touch Cam Aldred protection with a 10-foot pole because you sent him down in May. I think a lot of people forgot about that, and he got through waivers. Usually that'll tell you now, like 5-6 months later, I don't think a team's going to pick him up in the Rule 5 draft and have to force him to be like in those Rule 5 requirements if they didn't already pick him up off of waivers. Now, he didn't do bad this year, but if he cleared waivers in May, I don't think he would get picked up now.
Yeah, I mean, I would think another guy that I would consider is Cody Bolton, if only because I think he is very close to making the jump. I would think that if you wanted to take a shot at a Rule 5 guy to fill out your bullpen, Cody Bolton's a perfect guy. I think the Pirates still see him as a potential starter, but they have that position flexibility where he could, and he's only done like about 75 innings, so it's not as though bullpen is crazy. Great stuff. Really great stuff. Look at his K to walk rate. I mean, the kid is there's something there. The whip's great. I think he's probably somebody that I would consider protecting this year. They chose not to last year before they knew there wasn't going to be a Rule 5. But I think he's definitely proved to them that he's healthier this year, ready to go. I think I probably protect him. And Colin Selby is
Mhm.
another reliever that I think that they should probably think about locking up just to make sure that he's here.
Yes. I mean anything also, and I talked about this on my live show on the free agency show about should the Pirates do more in free agency, and I think they will in some capacity. Like I think they'll do like maybe like a one or two more minor trades or like pickups or whatever. Because again, like I mentioned with the catcher position earlier, you cannot go into the season with the bullpen and the starting rotation as currently constructed. I just don't think you can. I mean, Luis Ortiz and Bryce Wilson are your 4 or 5 in your rotation right now. I that to me, Ortiz could potentially be a guy that does well, but Bryce Wilson had his ups and downs also. But I just don't see the reasoning behind that being what you go into the year with. Now, I'm not saying that's what they're going to go into the year with, but I am agreeing in the sense of what you're saying about Cody Bolton and all these other relievers that could potentially be protected. Because the one thing the Pirates have had the biggest issue with over the last 2 years is their pitching depth has been absolutely terrible. It has been awful, be it injuries, be it bullpen mismanagement, be it starter mismanagement. You could go over all kinds of different things that it's been a result of. But if you have the opportunity to have enough pitchers on a certain roster, I would do it. That's how I would feel about it.
I think they do too. And, Charrington's on record saying that he's going to get at least one starter, maybe two. So I don't know. It's early to be starting the. They can't go into the season with this yet. It's friggin' November.
Yeah, I know.
They're gonna get people. like, I mean, like I'm hearing Sean Manaea, and I'm hearing like they're pretty realistically into it too.
Hmm.
Multiple years they're talking. So, I mean, if they're talking to people like that, they're gonna wind up getting a decent starter. And I don't think they're targeting a fifth starter. I think they want like a middle of the rotation type guy at least. So yeah, I think they're gonna improve there. But you have to keep the pitching depth when you internally develop it. You can't just let it walk out the door.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's another thing. I think I'm not really entirely sure if they've lost pitchers through the Rule 5 draft over time or if they just lost pitchers in general over the last couple of years. I think also the whole thing about the starting rotation, you can't go into it like that. I think it's just because of my impatience. I think I got spoiled with the fact that the Pirates literally when free agency opened, they made a move with G-Man Choi, and I was expecting just like everything to roll off the tongue and just go. And
Well,
I
you're
keep
pretty close to Atlanta down there too, so you're
yeah,
probably
yeah. It's like I'm like, okay, let's get this thing rolling. Like I'm hearing all this stuff, like all these things, but also for anybody who's just a generalized baseball fan, let's also keep in mind here that every top free agent hasn't signed yet, and you're barely hearing anything about most of them. The only one we've really heard anything about was Jacob DeGrom, and that he has interest in the Texas Rangers, and that's it. Like you have heard nothing about Aaron Judge, nothing about Carlos Correa, nothing about Trey Turner. That's because again, with the way the MLB offseason works, you're probably not going to see most of this stuff until December. Because when all those GMs get in one little room during winter meetings, and all of a sudden things start going the way they're supposed to, they just start having random conversations. And that's how I imagine it, by the way. I've always imagined it in a very humor like way, that they all just get in the same room, they like eat from the buffet or whatever, and then one of the GMs gets bored and he's like, hey, you want to trade me this guy? Or hey, how's Aaron doing over there in New York? Is he happy? You guys boot him off the field after the ALCS. You think he'd come over here? That's how I imagine it goes, and I know it's
See,
not.
it's funny you say that because I have heard a lot of chatter about a lot of those players. Like, I do think Judge to San Francisco is really close to a lock. They are not going to let themselves be outspent getting him back home,
Mhm.
and he's expressed interest in going. So the Yankees still hold court, but I think San Francisco is really involved.
Yeah.
So I think that's really, really possible. And DeGrom, yeah, I heard Texas, but I heard LA too. So
Baseball, man. It's again. I was very happy when baseball was brought back after the lockout and everything, but I still hear people upset about, oh, why are all these teams the only teams that can spend money? Well, that was the whole point of what the lockout was supposed to accomplish, and it didn't accomplish it. There was a lot of different things the lockout was supposed to accomplish that weren't accomplished. And that's why you're still seeing the same thing. Like Cleveland right now just went to game 5 of the ALDS, and you're hearing about Zach Plesac, Aaron Savale out of here. You're hearing about a lot of different guys that are just going to probably end up getting booted. The Tampa Bay Rays just made the playoffs in the wild card, and they're on a trade tour. Like Nick Anderson, gone. G-Man Choi, gone. They have teams calling on Tyler Glasnow already. Like, I mean, they're already kind of making their big moves. And for me, for the Pirates especially, I get it as a Pirates fan being upset that Sean Manaea is like the big name that they're going after. But I understand he didn't have the greatest year this year, but at least Sean Manaea is a guy who has had Major League Baseball success as a starting pitcher. He's had, and it's recent success. It's not like this past year, but the year before and a couple years before that, he was a very good starting pitcher. And also the fact that, as you mentioned, they're thinking about multiple years for him. That is a welcome sign, a very welcome sign. And this is also the same team that just picked up Tyler Anderson and Jose Quintana in back to back years. Those guys are now priced out of Pittsburgh's price range because of how well they pitched here and to where they went.
they might be out of their price range. They might not, but we'll see. I think they're gonna do some decent things here. Nothing earth shattering. I don't think they're gonna dive in with both feet, but
No.
they're gonna try at least to be more competent this year. That's what the G-Man Choi deal says to me. They got a real Major League Baseball player instead of somebody that might be.
Yeah. And I, by the way, I don't know if you've had a chance to see my reaction to that. I absolutely love that move. I have seen people that were kind of upset about it, but I did tweet out about it. I said, at best, he's a 15 to 20 home run guy and a great defensive first baseman for you in 2022 or 2023. At worst, he's a stopgap for guys like Matt Gorski, Malcolm Nunez, and Mason Martin next year. I mean, there's no real loss to me in this as long as he's not Yoshi Tsutsugo bad. Now, if he's Yoshi
Yeah,
Tsutsugo bad, then okay, then we're kind of getting into weird territory again. But I think G-Man Choi is good enough that I don't think he would fall down to that level of mediocrity.
I think he's good enough for what they were shooting for. So I'm happy there. I think we'll be pleasantly surprised though. As far as the Rule 5, because that's what we really started talking about.
Hmm.
It really shouldn't be more complicated than Burrows and Endy, and then maybe two more. Pick from Gorski, Selby, Bolton, Nunez. That's about it. I wouldn't go much further than that. And I've saw some wild things too, like people think they're gonna cut Travis Swaggerty like for room. They're not gonna cut the number one selection from 2018, even though they didn't make it. Even though you've all created this narrative that Charrington hates everybody that Huntington drafted and or acquired. There's just so much bullshit online. It's you just must stop pretending that everybody that has pirates in their handle is an expert. Honest to God, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah,
Travis Swaggerty is not getting cut.
no.
He might get traded, but he isn't getting cut.
Yeah, and also if we want to go ahead and debunk the theory that Charrington hates anybody that Huntington acquired or drafted, O'Neal Cruz would not have played this year.
Yeah, Brian Reynolds.
Brian Reynolds would not be on this team anymore.
Mitch
Brian
Keller.
Hayes would not have got an 8-year, $70 million extension.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of Roanzi. Roanzi was a Charrington guy. I forget about that. God, I love that trade to this day still. Anyways, we're going on a tangent here anyways, but 5 o'clock Eastern time appears to be the deadline for the Rule 5 draft stuff. So, of course, I'll be active on Twitter and maybe even drop an episode if the Pirates decide to, get dabble in the trade market. Because usually with this day, there's a lot of minor little trades that end up being big deals later in the year. So we'll see if that happens today. But, Gary, what are you working on at Bucks in the Basement and at Pirates Fan Forum this week?
Pirates Fan Forum, we're still trying to figure out who we're going to have on as a guest. We're digging around, seeing who's available. Maybe you. Maybe you could be a last resort. You owe me, probably.
I probably for something probably.
We'll figure out who's going to come on. As far as writing goes, well, we're going to just keep up with news this week. Today we're going to have two guys talking, doing a piece about trading David Bednar. They basically do the valuations and propose some different things that the Pirates could get back. They did Brian Reynolds last week. We'll just keep up with news from there on the rest of the week.
Yeah, well, as a Pittsburgh Pirates fan, I don't think I don't think they're the breaking news team, but you never know. You never really know, because I remember during his conversation with MLB Network last week, who I actually just slammed before we started on this, and you guys can figure out why. Charrington had a pretty different answer on Brian Reynolds than he normally did. That kind of sparked some conversation, but I didn't read too much into it. But with that said, guys, as mentioned, if anything crazy happens or at the 5 p.m. deadline with the Pirates making trades or anything, or who they protect, you might get another show today, or we'll just be very active on Twitter. So make sure you go follow at Locked On Pirates. Make sure you go follow Gary at GaryMo2007. Follow me at MVP_Ethan. And with that said, guys, I will see you on the flip side, everybody.